We're going to change up our our order or our normal situation tonight. I'm not going to do a interactive session. I'm going to share a message with you that I feel like is significant. I've been thinking about it. So we've been in for a couple weeks now. This was a 2-week Bible study that we've been studying, and it started at the end of chapter 26 and verse 34, and it went on to chapter 28, verse 9. So that's a huge chunk. And honestly, the story is the story of Jacob and Esau at its core, right? So I had that scheduled for a 1-week Bible study and had fully intended to basically focus on the chapter 27 chunk that was the story of Jacob and Esau, and kind of just study that in Bible study and throw off kind of all of the chaff that was around it and whatever, and kind of zoom through that and not take an extra week on that. And as I was studying the text, I felt like God checked me on that and told me that there's something around this text that appears for a reason and maybe brings context to the story that we all feel like we know or think we know. So I know that I heard a lot of discussion sort of surrounding last week's Bible study in chapter 27 with Jacob and Esau. You know, we're trying to contextualize tonight that text. So with the stuff that's around it. So we took the little verse or two at the beginning and a couple paragraphs at the end there, and we said, how does this change the way we think about what we just read? We think we know. So there was a lot of discussion even tonight. I don't know what happened last week. Maybe some of you weren't even here last week, but there was a lot of discussion in Bible study about, did Rebecca do the right thing? She used some trickeration to kind of get this blessing given to Jacob. Some people said, no, that can't be. I think that was one of my answers in the Bible study. That doesn't seem like it can be right. And then I heard some other people saying, yeah, it's, this was the will of the Lord, and he had already, she was just making sure that what had happened when he traded his birthright was followed through with, and maybe that's true. I don't know, maybe. And so this was just, they were going to sort of undermine the will of God if she didn't step in, maybe.
Don't worry about it.
I don't know. So there was a lot of like this kind of discussion, and I still don't know the answer to all that. I still don't know. But I want to, Lord, let that fade into the background a little bit and focus on something that for some reason God, through the author that wrote down Genesis, somehow he put this information in here that some of us have probably read through, skipped over, just kind of ignored because we didn't know what to do with it. But if there's something talked about, and in this case it's this reference that we see starting in 26:34, it says, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and also Basemath, daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And then we start in 27 when Isaac was old and his eyes were weak, and that's the story of the blessing. Then in verse 46, like as soon as that story's sort of over, it begins again, and it says, I say over because that's the way we think of it, right? We sort of box it off. As soon as that story is over, then somehow we magically return to this discussion of Esau's wives. It says, then Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living. Dramatic much? I don't know. Like, dude. I'll be honest. I have said to my wife before when I'm watching other wives, I have said these words. Now, this is like confession time. I said, hon, I'm so glad that God gave me you, because if I was married to her, she would be buried in the backyard. And I've said that. Have I said that? I've said that. Okay. God just knew what he was doing. He knew what I could handle and what I couldn't handle. I'm not sure I could have handled this woman with her my life won't be worth living nonsense. But the point of it was that she can't stand that Esau has married these Hittite women. And she won't stand for Jacob also marrying Hittite women. So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then now was this an additional blessing or was this the blessed? See, sometimes when we're reading in Scripture, it's confusing to me because the way things are written down, I always think, sometimes there's a story and then there's another story. So then there's like a blessing and then another blessing. Sometimes there's a story and then there's like a zoom out story where this blessing is, I always think of it like this, like a map. If I got a map of Albuquerque, then I'm guessing that downtown would have an inset that's kind of zoomed in. Or Nob Hill or Old Town or something like that would have this inset. And so sometimes when I'm reading the Bible, especially in certain Old Testament texts where we know that the scripture was written down sort of long after it actually happened, so there was a lot of verbal history, and sometimes in some of the books even there was some editorial work done where they brought together more than one work that was told. And we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of Genesis when we were studying the beginning of Genesis and talking about the creation story and how it sort of feels like there's multiple stories, but most of us had never noticed that before. So for me, I don't know because this sounds like, was he blessing, like was this not the blessing, but it was a blessing, like he was blessing him to go and find a wife? Or was this all like, okay, so he blessed him, and that's the blessing we've already talked? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But it says, so Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him. Then he commanded him, do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there from among your mother, the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. He was told to marry his cousin, just so if you didn't catch that. For those of you who were here the week when my kids are convinced that I said my cousin was hot. Anyway, yeah. It's in the Bible, it's fine. No, just kidding. Just kidding. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing given to Abraham, so that you may take the possession of the land where you now reside as a foreigner, the land God gave to Abraham. So let me just say this. This is important. If you weren't here the week, and it's not been that many weeks that we were studying the passage that Abraham was old and was dying, and he made sure that Isaac, his servant, got a wife for Isaac from this same place. And Laban, that's mentioned here, was in that story because Laban's the one that came out and met the servant once Rebekah showed up at home with the bracelets on, the jewelry, and got him back to the house. And so Laban was involved in that story. So now we're going back to the same family to get and then he says, so that God will give the blessing that he gave to Abraham to you. So in other words, what Isaac is saying is that somehow this blessing seems to be tied to a certain way of doing things, a certain life. And I'm going to contend that life is a life of obedience. It's not a life of legalism or whatever, because they didn't even have the law at that point, but it's a life of obedience. And that life of obedience, if you go back, is that one, God called Abraham out of his land and away from his people to this new people. But God also was very clear on some things. And it really feels like God was commanding Abraham when Abraham made sure that Isaac followed through with the things that were involved in the covenant. And one of them was not intermarrying with the Canaanites. And by the way, we know that that's something that's from God, not just because Abraham said, we're not going to let Isaac do this, but because further on, we find out that this becomes one of the main things that God repeats to Israel over and over and over is, please don't intermarry with the peoples around you. And I know historically in America, these passages have been badly misinterpreted and basically used as an excuse for racism at times, I think, which is totally not in the spirit of what God was trying to say. It really didn't have to do with the people groups that they were marrying, but God is really specific when he speaks to Israel. And by the way, I know this is later on, so they didn't have this information at the time when Jacob is here in this story and Esau. But later on, God is very specific about the reasons he doesn't want them intermarrying with the other peoples. And that is because they worshiped other gods. And apparently, particularly men, are influenced by women. Well, this is hard to believe. For whatever reason, men are very influenced. In other words, I think some women know this. I think some women, we've been watching corgi videos about training corgi. We've been taking care of a corgi for a few months now. We're going to get a corgi of our own because I think the corgi we've been taking care of is going to go home. So corgis are very interesting little doggies. And I really identified with the video because we were told corgis are very food motivated. And I'm like, I get that. And so you can get corgis to do just about anything if you are consistent with what you reward with food. And I get that. I totally get that. So I was thinking about that, and I don't want to be crass, but if we look at society, I think we can say that people, and especially men, are not just food motivated, but also sex drive motivated. That's actually one of the biggest problems that we have probably in America. It's one of the biggest problems we probably have in the American church, and if we fall head over heels for some woman, the chances of us sort of throwing everything out the window to what man would ever become a vegan? I'm convinced only one whose wife decided, or girlfriend, or whatever. I don't know. Maybe there are men that want to do that all on their own, but I think The fact that there are men who are vegans is proof positive that women can influence men in whatever way they want. So God said, don't chase after these other women, because I know what will happen is you will eventually compromise you serving God. You will eventually decide that, and I've seen it. I've seen it in life, in ministry. Somebody says, "Oh, I'm marrying this person, or I'm dating this person. They don't love Jesus, but they're okay with me coming to church, and that's fine, and that's okay." Right up until they're like, "You're always at the church. What are you ever doing? Like, why don't you ever spend time with your family? Why don't you ever?" And they're like, "Well, I would spend time with my family if they were at church when I'm at church." You know that, and you have this wrestling. Why do you have this wrestling? Well, because our values do not line up, and when our values don't line up, then there's this tension. And there's this tendency for the Christian to compromise. And the number of times that happens in pulling the Christian away from God is actually far, far more common than any time I've ever seen the Christian pull the unbeliever to God. It's just, honestly, the Christian has already compromised their values to cross the aisle. That person kind of already knows they got them, so they don't really have to cross. Right? My boys were going through our back room. I guess it was a few months ago, right? Cleaning the back room. Our back room's one that it's the music room, but it also becomes the junk room. If we need to somebody's coming over, we need to get rid of this, we toss it through the back door, into the back room. You guys got one of those? So, we couldn't walk through the back room. We get home from Sunday and the instruments get tossed through the door along with every Amazon box we've ever had, which my wife will tell you is my fault. I'm the one that says that's a good box. I've hit that stage in life where I'm valuing boxes. Never mind that 30 of them are going to come in the next week from Amazon anyway, and I really don't but the one time I want to send something is usually the day after my wife threw away all the boxes. So my boys organized the back room. They threw away all the boxes, and I sold something online and needed to pick it up the next day, and no boxes. I'm like, well, if I buy the box, it's like costs the same amount as what I just sold this thing for. So like, what's the point? Anyway, so they found this box that I made, and I made this box in 5th grade. My grandpa was a woodworker. I was out in his shop with him, having fun, and he let me use his scraps to make things. So I found scraps and put them together, and I made this wooden box for a girl in 5th grade. I know this is hard to believe. So I made it for a girl, and I decided the box was about that big a square. It was about that long, and I decided I called it a Cush cottage. Is anybody my age? Does anybody remember when we had Cushes? They were like balls of rubber bands where they cut and the rubber bands, and you could like use them like a yo-yo with the rubber bands. And everybody in 5th grade had a Cush or 10. Nobody else. Rebecca, remember? Nobody else. It's just that age. It's just like it's like the Pogs or the fidget spinners, or I don't know anything about Pogs, but I had Cushes. So I decided everybody had a Cush. I made this wonderful wood box for this girl that I really likes Cushes. Now, I still have it in my back room because I was actually so insecure and afraid that I never gave it to her. It's really a miracle I ever got married at this point. The number of times that I left, like I met Cynthia at church, the number of times I left church, walked out and banged my head on the steering wheel in the church parking lot because I didn't ask her out, it's just a miracle I ever found a wife. So anyway, in this Cush cottage was pretty much every note apparently that I had ever received from a girl. And I got home and my kids were halfway through reading every note that I had ever received from a girl. And they're like, what is all these notes? And I was like, that's what we did before we had Snapchat, I guess. Now nobody writes notes. They text, they snap, they whatever. We used to write notes and we'd pass them, And I apparently received far more notes than I realized, because there were people in there. My kids decided that I indeed in middle school and high school was the Rizzler. Is that right? So that's what they decided. Now here's the thing. I dated. If you're above about 17, you don't know what that meant. It's okay. Ask the teens; they'll tell you. So I've been. They were reading the notes. I in middle school, mostly in high school, I dated. We didn't call it dating. I went out with. No, we didn't hook up. That was something entirely different. That was what happened when I went to college. No, we went out. My mom would say, "Where are you going?" So we're not going anywhere. You're so stupid. Then you just said you're going out, but you're not going anywhere. No, we're just going out. And so anyway, I was going out with about 2 to 3 girls per school year, not all at the same time, one at a time, which the longest was like 3 months. Like really, let me just tell you, in case you think I was the Rizzler, I was a big nerd, and I suddenly grew 6 inches in high school, like between 8th grade and freshman year. And all of a sudden, everybody forgot I was a nerd, and I re-envisioned my whole life and my and I was totally different, and it all happened at band camp, and that's where I became not a nerd. I don't feel like you're confident in this story, right? You got to understand. There was only like 300 people in my entire high school, and we had like 150 of them in band. So there was a lot of cool people in band, okay? Trust me. My mom would, every time I was going out with a new girl, my mom always asked me this question: is she a Christian? And my mom was always so hopeful, so positive. She just is she a Christian? Some of you are moms. You've done that. Is she a Christian? Does she go to church? And the answer was always no. Or actually, most of the time, the answer was, I don't know. You know why the answer was, I don't know? Because I didn't care. That's the truth. Because I didn't care. And so I didn't ask. So I didn't know. And my guess is a lot of them went to church, because I lived in rural Indiana, and probably a lot of people went to church. But I never cared enough to ask, and my guess is, based on their behavior at school, whether they went to church or not really didn't matter a lot, because they weren't actually a Christian. So something changed in college where I was hurt pretty bad, and I decided, I called it recreational dating. But all of a sudden you get to a certain age where it's not so recreational anymore. You're starting to think about life, right? And I was hurt pretty bad, and I just didn't date anybody for years until I came to Sandia, and until I met Cynthia. And some of you know the story. Cynthia and I we were only dating 3 months when we got engaged. Now, we were engaged 16 months, so nobody should question why we were rushing into anything. We didn't rush into anything. But we had discussions within the first month of dating about what is this all about? What are we trying to do here? And that God needed to be the most important, and that's how everything started. And we had discussions within the first few months about if we're not dating because if we don't think that God is in this, and if he's not brought us together, why we don't need to continue this. That was kind of the discussion. So we had discussions, and so the reason we were engaged after 3 months ultimately was because we had decided that either God was in this and we should continue, or God was not in this and we should not continue. And that was, let me just tell you, that was so different than any relationship that I ever had. It started different, it continued different, the discussions were different, and it was so different that I tell people this. I tell people that I am convinced that if God had not sent me, Cynthia, that I might not be a pastor today, I might not even be a Christian today, that literally it was so vital to my path in my life that this is where God, and we talked about it because God showed me things that he had for my life through her, and he showed her things about what he wanted her to know through me, and we are closer to God than we ever would have been without each other, and that was the thing. So but that only happened because both of us decided that was what was important to us. Because if I continued on the path I was on before, who I would have ended up with would have been somebody that had the goals in mind, or that had what I was looking for, by the way, then, that had the same goals in mind that I had at that time. I didn't care whether they were going to get me closer to God or pull me away from God. But by the time I met Cynthia, I did care. So I say all that to sort of contextualize when I read this, and I read that Esau, the whole story seems to be surrounded by this thought of who was Esau married to, and then who did they call Jacob to go and marry, and then what did Esau do? See, it's really interesting what Esau did in response. Because Esau already before this point was married to Hittites, the Canaanites. Now, if you remember when we studied the story of Noah, what happened when Noah was sort of drunk and passed out naked, and his one kid was laughing, that was the father of Canaan. And God cursed Ham, Canaan, from then on. So by the time Israel comes in and takes the promised land, we understand that the reason he favored Israel over Canaan is because one group was favored by him because they sought after God, because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sought after the will of God to make sure that the steps that they took drew them close, before the law existed, that the steps that they took brought them closer to God and not taking them far away. Esau, we see the pattern of his life from before. He doesn't care. He's an impulsive, passionate guy. Food and sex. Right? If you go to the commentaries, it actually talks about that even earlier when he was selling his birthright, that the attitude that he had for that soup and the birthright was reflected in his choice of women. They were close. They were available. That's all it really needed to be, isn't it? And let me just ask you, I know we're not there yet, but you really think Esau would have waited 7 years for his bride? That's not the character that we're reading about Esau. The character, by the way, the character that we're reading about Esau is very much the character that I had before I came to Christ. The character that we're reading about Esau is very much the character that any of us has before we come to Christ. It's the character of somebody that wants to feed their belly, that wants to get their pleasure. And that rules everything. And the question is, are we going to be the sort of people that continues on that path where our physical pleasure and desires is what rules our life, or are we going to be the sort of person that is willing to wait for what God has in our life? That is willing to do the thing that God's calling us to do, even if it's hard. Even if it means we take some stands that are difficult to take. So it's really interesting. At the end of this text, it says, "Now Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there. And that when he blessed him, he commanded him, 'Do not marry a Canaanite woman.' And that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and had gone to Paddan Aram. Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac, so he also went to Paddan Aram and found a wife from his mother's family," right? No, that's not what it says. So he went to Ishmael, the brother of Isaac, not the brother of the promise, not the brother who was created out of us trying to do it ourselves instead of putting our trust into God. The brother that exists, he lives because he is like a living representation of trying to do God's will, but take a shortcut. His people probably lived closer than Paddan Aram. So he went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, the sister of Nebaioth, the daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to the wives he already had. So Esau said, man, my parents don't like these Canaanites. So he went to non-Canaanites. But not the people who sought out God. Ishmael didn't seek out God. So, I'm going to fix this. I know how to get my parents happy with me. I'm going to do something like my... You ever do that? Like, it's kind of a Cain and Abel thing. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Why do you keep trying to sort of finagle? Why do you keep trying to do something short of what God has asked you to do? And hope that he blesses that. I had this question in my mind. What if it really does matter who we marry? What if it really does matter who we date? What if it really does matter? What if God really does care? Because God has a vision and a plan for our lives. And we have a choice whether we follow His will for our lives or a different path. And we have this tendency to say, no, but this is, God, can't you bless this path over here? Isn't that what Esau wanted? He wanted his father to bless his path. But God hadn't blessed that path. God had blessed Jacob's path. And Jacob obeyed. I have people come to me a lot. Many times I had people show up at my door with a marriage certificate saying, Pastor, will you marry us? I don't know these people. Sometimes I would say, yes, I'll marry you, but not today. I want to at least sit down with you once for marriage counseling. Nowadays, I don't do that. We're going to do marriage counseling for at least a month, if not more. And if that's not okay, you can go to a justice of the peace or find other pastors that'll do it. I don't know. But I'm not going to do it. Because honestly, the percentage of people that I performed a wedding for that remained married was so low that I realized this isn't pleasing to God. This isn't. So I really, at this point, if you show up with a marriage certificate and ask me to marry you, I will pretty much just say no. Not even if we counsel for a while. And the reason is because in counseling, one of the options has to be that you do not get married, that you are seeking God honestly enough to see if it's His will, that you are, particularly if you haven't been really good at following God's will previously. If you've been don't have really a track record or a pattern of following God's will. Yeah, we're going to do counseling with the understanding that as we go along, if we decide together that this is not the will of God, that you won't get married. And if you're not willing to even accept that idea, then you're probably not going to listen to any of the counseling I'm doing anyway, because you've already decided in your mind and you're going to do it your way. People are coming to me. They got the cart before the horse. They're sometimes I had somebody come to me once. They were already they had an affair. She was married when they met, and they had an affair, and they said, Pastor, will you marry us? She got divorced from the other guy and wanted me. I said, no. They said, well, why not? We believe God has us together. And I said, I don't believe that. I don't think, well, here's the thing, is the American culture is at a place now where we think we can just say some vows in front of a pastor and all of a sudden God puts His rubber stamp of approval on our marriage. Like, oh, we're living in sin, but if we just have a little wedding at the church, then God will be okay with it all. I don't think that's the way God works. So I said, I'll tell you what, you move out, you separate and don't date, don't see each other for a year before you go on your next date. Then if you can still tell me that you believe that God's in it, then I'll consider counseling you and marrying you. Do you think they did that? No way. No way. And if God was really in it, wouldn't that not have been too much? Sometimes those things are a measure. Sometimes those little things are a measure of why we're doing what we're doing. We can say, am I willing to take a stand for what is right? Then maybe God might be in it. But if I'm not willing to take a stand, then I'm pursuing this for reasons entirely other than God. Will you pray with me? God, we are so grateful because we really believe you've been with us tonight. We really believe you've been speaking to us tonight. We really believe that there's a purpose that you put this stuff in here. That it's not an accident that this thought sort of hugs or sandwiches this story of Jacob and Esau, that there's something to this. That you really do care about who is influencing our lives at the level of a spouse. Well, we ask you to search us. Maybe we're already married. I mean, maybe it's not the time to decide whether we're supposed to be married or not. We're already in it. And it's time to get on the same page and serve you together. But for those of us that aren't yet married, we have some thinking to do about how we choose somebody that would be that close to us, that would have that kind of influence on our lives. What values we need them to have. Lord, that they would be the sort of people, and it's not any longer about race or about people groups, because people all over the world have heard the message of Jesus Christ, and people all over the world have said no to the message of Jesus Christ. And so it's not about where you're from or what culture you are or nationality. It really is about, do we know and serve and love Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. Lord, help us as we walk through our lives to realize that some of the biggest decisions we ever make in our lives, they start not always with the big decision, but they start with who we hang out with. They start with who we date. They start early on in what our value system is when we're choosing those activities and those people that we're going to be around. Lord, help us to make right choices now so that when the big decisions come, we know where our priorities are. We know what stand we've taken. God, lead us. We need you. Thank you for your word and how it changes us. We bring these things in Jesus' name. Amen.